Welcome to the VHF UHF channel, and just wanted to talk a little bit about the low VHF range that a lot of scanner radios start. So when you have scanner radios, if you have an old scanner, Radio Shack, Uniden, whatever out there, and even, of course, more modern communications receivers, they all start, roughly around 30 megahertz. Some of them start at 25. 28, 29, it depends on the radio, but a lot of them start actually at 30 megahertz. One of the things that is interesting that to note in the 30 to 54 megahertz range, that pretty much every scanner has a range that you can scan, is the ability to sometimes open up with communications from really far away. And that's one of the fun things of that range. Here, when I scan 30 to 54, there's not a lot of local activity. There's a couple of signals and a couple of things that are there, but not a lot. There used to be that range in the 46 megahertz where there was, of course, cordless phones and the good old days. These are, gone now. There's really no activity there. I don't think there's a lot of those still working today. Baby monitors, that I still hear on the 49 megahertz range, so you can maybe scan for that. But apart from that, most of the band is depending on where you live, more or less quiet. But there's a lot of activity still in the range. There's still a lot of law enforcement that still always, use old equipment that have 30 megahertz, 40 megahertz capabilities, fire departments, and so on. But they might not be local to you, but there's something and a phenomena that is interesting. I was talking about how we reached solar minimum in December 2019. And of course, as solar activity will increase, so will the propagation of signals through the ionosphere on higher frequencies. And one of the interesting aspects of the low VHF range is the fact that there are several phenomena that can actually make the low VHF range propagate a little bit like shortwave radio does by bouncing off the ionosphere when conditions are right. Of course, there's solar activity as we get into the next few years in solar maximum. There will be openings in the 30 to 54 megahertz range because of solar activity that will make propagation of those signals possible. But one that is overlooked by a lot of listeners, and frankly, a lot of scanner listeners actually don't understand the basics of radio propagation, so they don't really know that 30 to 54 is kind of a magic band sometimes. When Sporadic E, for example, happens, what happens is that you might be hearing a lot of activity in the 30 to 54. Actually, every time that Sporadic E happens, I do a scan from 30 to 54 megahertz. Because I'm bound to hear some communications from far away. One of the interesting aspects of the communications there also is trying to identify what you're listening to. So whatever you're listening to, try to get an idea of, first of all, note down the frequency. Make sure that you note down as much detail as possible of things that they talk that could maybe help you identify a location. So to give you an idea, I've heard police chase on highways in Texas. I've heard fire departments from different states in the United States. And you might think, well, all of that must be gone today with digital and everything. And it's not true. There are still hundreds, if not thousands, of services that still use the 30 to 50 megahertz range today. It's not as used as it used to in the past, but it is still popular enough that when propagation opens up, you actually can hear some of those. One of the ways that I check for propagation is often with the CB. If you put yourself on channel 6 on a CB radio or 27025 on a radio, if you start hearing a lot of activity there, that means that it's possible that 30 to 50 megahertz is actually open. And that means listen in. And of course, there's the 50 to 54 megahertz range where there's scanner It's the 6-meter amateur radio band where you might actually hear some activity. There's a lot of FM activity, and there are some FM repeaters that could be propagating in the 53, 52, 53 megahertz range on a regular analog scanner. Of course, if you've got a communications receiver with single sideband capability, it's even more interesting because you open up an even bigger world of communications. But do scan regularly 30 to 54. You will be surprised that someday, you might not hear anything for 2 weeks, but someday you'll scan and you're like, oh, look at that. There's a few signals, or maybe a lot of signals propagating, and usually also an indication that they are coming from far away. Just like shortwave signals, what they will do is simply fade in and out of the communication. So you'll listen to something and you'll see it fade out, come back, fade in, just like a shortwave station does when you listen to shortwave. That usually means you're listening to something that is from far away, and propagating through the ionosphere, possibly. If you enjoy my videos, please subscribe, give us a thumbs up. Thank you for watching.